When did you realize your spouse married you for the wrong reasons? The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering against the kitchen tiles as Marcus's voice drifted through the crack in his office door. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Sarah's too trusting for her own good. His laugh made my stomach clench. The trust fund accessibility changes when she turns 35 next month. That's when we can really start moving serious money. I stood frozen in our hallway, barefoot among the ceramic shards, as my husband of 3 years discussed me like a business transaction with someone on the other end of that call. Look, David, I know the Q3 numbers are bad, but I got her convinced to put another $200,000 into Next Tech next week. She thinks it's because I believe in the future we're building together. Another laugh, this one sharper. The woman has no idea how close we are to bankruptcy. My legs felt like water. Next Tech Solutions, Marcus's revolutionary startup that was supposed to change how small businesses manage their supply chains. The company I'd already invested $400,000 in over the past 18 months because I believed in my husband's vision. Because I believed in us. She's isolated enough now that even if she started getting suspicious, who would she tell? I made sure she cut ties with most of her college friends. They were too smart, asking too many questions about my background. Her sister Emma was sniffing around the company finances last Christmas, so I convinced Sarah that Emma was just jealous of our relationship. The words hit me like physical blows. Emma, who'd stopped calling after our fight about Marcus being too controlling. My former roommate Jennifer, who I'd stopped speaking to after Marcus pointed out how she always tried to undermine our decisions. My college friend group, who I'd gradually drifted from because Marcus said they didn't understand our lifestyle. I thought I was choosing love over their concerns. I thought I was being a supportive wife. The beauty is, she thinks it was all her idea. I just guided her toward better choices. Choices that aligned with our financial goals. Marcus's voice was moving closer to the door. Trust me, by the time her 35th birthday hits on October 15th, we'll have access to the full inheritance her grandmother left her. That's $2.3 million, plus the quarterly disbursements from her parents' portfolio. I backed away from the door on shaking legs, my feet crunching over broken porcelain. Numbers swirled in my head. October 15th was 26 days away. The inheritance I'd barely thought about, money that had just been an abstract future security, was apparently the center of an elaborate con. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, working late again tonight, baby. Don't wait up. Love you, red heart. Love. The word felt poisonous now. I stared at the message, then at the closed office door where my husband was still talking, probably planning how to drain my family's wealth to save his failing company. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of what I thought was the deepest love I'd ever experienced. My hand stopped shaking as something cold and clear settled over me. Marcus wanted to play a long game? He wanted to manipulate and deceive? Fine. Two could play that game. I grabbed my laptop and headed upstairs, already composing an email to my lawyer. If Marcus thought Sarah Chin Morrison was too trusting for her own good, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The next morning, I sat across from Patricia Valdez in her downtown law office, watching her manicured fingers drum against the mahogany desk as she reviewed the financial documents I'd printed at 3 a.m. Sarah, this is extensive, Patricia said, her voice carefully neutral. She'd been our family's attorney for 12 years, handling everything from my parents' estate planning to my grandmother's trust fund setup. Your husband has been quite thorough in documenting these investment requests. I brought everything, the signed agreements transferring money to Next Tech Solutions, email chains where Marcus had walked me through why each investment was crucial for our future, even the romantic dinner receipts from the nights he pitched me on funding his company's expansion. Looking at it all laid out in black and white made my chest tight. The good news is that the main inheritance is protected, Patricia continued, sliding her reading glasses down her nose. Your grandmother was very specific about the trust structure. Even as your spouse, Marcus can't access those funds directly. But these investment transfers you've already made. She shook her head. Once money moves from your personal accounts into his company, it becomes significantly harder to recover. How much am I looking at losing? Based on these documents? The $400,000 you've already invested, plus whatever you transfer in the coming weeks. If Next Tech declares bankruptcy, which sounds likely from what you overheard, that money disappears with the company. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, morning beautiful. Excited about our investment meeting with David tomorrow. You're going to love the Q4 projection sparkles. The meeting. I'd forgotten. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., Marcus wanted me to meet with David Chin, no relation, despite the shared surname, who served as Next Tech as CFO and Marcus's business partner. The same David who'd been on that phone call yesterday, planning my financial destruction. Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. I leaned forward. Is there any way to prove fraud? To show that Marcus married me specifically to access my money? She was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers. Fraud requires proving intent and deception. If we could demonstrate that he misrepresented his financial situation when you married, or that he's been lying about his company's viability to secure investments, possibly. But we'd need evidence beyond overheard phone conversations. What kind of evidence? Documentation. Emails, financial records, recorded conversations if legal in your state, which they are, with single-party consent. Evidence that he knew Next Tech was failing while he was soliciting investments from you. Patricia pulled out a legal pad. The challenge is gathering this information without alerting him to your suspicions. I thought about Marcus's office downstairs, always locked when he wasn't home. His laptop that he never left unattended. The way he'd started taking calls outside or behind closed doors over the past few months. There's something else, Patricia said, checking her calendar. Next Tech Solutions is registered as seeking Series B funding. There's a major investor presentation scheduled for October 20th, 5 days after your birthday, 5 days after the trust fund becomes accessible. The timing isn't coincidental. October 20th. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my calendar. Marcus had marked it as Next Tech Big Day, with celebration emojis. He'd asked me to keep the date free because he wanted me there to see our dreams become reality. Our dreams. The phrase made me nauseated now. I want to be at that presentation, I told Patricia. And I want to make sure that when Marcus tries to access my inheritance on October 15th, we're ready for him. Patricia smiled grimly. Then we have 25 days to build a case. I hope you're prepared for this to get complicated, Sarah. Men like your husband don't give up easily. That evening, I made dinner like nothing had changed. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, Marcus's favorite. I even opened the bottle of Pinot Noir he'd been saving for a special occasion. When he walked through the door at 7:30, briefcase in hand and that familiar smile lighting up his face, I almost forgot he was my enemy now. This smells incredible, he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I plated the fish. His kiss on my neck felt exactly the same as it had a week ago, before I knew the truth. What's the occasion? Can't I spoil my husband? I turned in his arms, forcing myself to meet his eyes. Green eyes that had once made me feel like the only woman in the world. Besides, I'd been thinking about our conversation last week. About the additional Next-Tech investment. His expression brightened immediately. Oh? And what conclusions did my brilliant wife reach? The words, my brilliant wife, hit differently now. Not affection, strategy. I think you're right. If we're going to do this, we should do it properly. I handed him a glass of wine, watching his face carefully. What if we went bigger than 200,000? My birthday's coming up, and the trust accessibility changes. We could really make a statement to your investors. Marcus went very still. For just a moment, something flickered across his features. Surprise? Calculation, before the loving husband mask slid back into place. Sarah, I don't want you to feel pressured to use your inheritance money. That's your family's legacy. God, he was good. The concern in his voice sounded completely genuine. It's our family now, I said, echoing words he'd used countless times when convincing me to distance myself from Emma and my parents. Besides, what's the point of having money if we don't use it to build something amazing together? Over dinner, Marcus painted beautiful pictures of our future. The house we'd buy in Marin County once Next-Tech went public. The travel we'd do once his company was acquired by Google or Microsoft. He'd always been confident it was a matter of when, not if. He described a life so appealing that part of me wanted to forget what I'd overheard, to sink back into the fantasy we'd been living. But then he mentioned David. Actually, David suggested something interesting today, Marcus said, refilling our wine glasses. Since you'll be at tomorrow's meeting anyway, what if we made it a celebration? Announce your increased investment right there, show the other potential investors that my own wife believes in the company's future. Other potential investors? Just a few local angel investors David's been courting. Nothing formal, but having them see your confidence in Next-Tech. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. It would mean everything to me, Sarah. To us. I squeezed back, my stomach churning. Of course. How much should we announce? Well, with the trust fund accessibility changing on your birthday. Marcus paused, as if the idea was just occurring to him. What if we announced a $1 million investment? Really show them we're serious. $1 million. Nearly half of my inheritance, gone in a single theatrical gesture designed to lure other victims into Marcus's failing company. That's a lot, I said carefully. I know. And if you're not comfortable? No, you're right. I smiled, hoping it looked more convincing than it felt. Go big or go home, right? After dinner, while Marcus took a shower, I texted Patricia, emergency. Meeting tomorrow 2 p.m. with investors. He wants me to announce $1 million investment publicly. What do I do? Her response came within minutes, play along. We need to see who else is involved. I'm calling in a favor with a private investigator. Can you wear a wire? I stared at my phone, listening to Marcus humming in the shower upstairs. Tomorrow I'd sit in a room full of strangers and lie about investing $1 million in my husband's fraud. The thought terrified me. But not as much as the realization that I was actually looking forward to it. The private investigator looked nothing like I'd expected. Rebecca Santos was barely 5 feet tall with purple-streaked hair and wore a vintage band t-shirt under her blazer. She met me at a coffee shop downtown at 11 a.m., 3 hours before the Next-Tech meeting, and I was questioning Patricia's judgment until Rebecca pulled out equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. The wire goes here, she said, demonstrating on herself with a device no bigger than a shirt button. Audio range is about 20 feet, but it'll pick up everything in a standard conference room. The receiver stays in your purse, just keep it within 50 feet of your body. My hands shook as I practiced clipping the wire to my bra strap. What if they search me? They won't. This is a business meeting, not a drug deal. Rebecca's smile was reassuring. Though honestly, after looking at Next-Tech's financials last night, the fraud might be more extensive than your husband's marriage scam. What do you mean? She pulled out a folder thick with printed documents. I have a contact at the SEC. Next-Tech Solutions has been under quiet investigation for 3 months. They've been inflating their client numbers and revenue projections in investor materials. What your husband told you about Q3 numbers being bad? Try catastrophic. The company has exactly 4 active clients and burned through their last legitimate funding round in June. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. So the bankruptcy Marcus mentioned. Imminent. Unless they secure major funding in the next 30 days, Next-Tech will collapse. Which explains why your husband is so interested in your October 15th birthday. Rebecca handed me a sheet of paper. These are the other investors who've been contacted for today's meeting. Notice anything? I scanned the list. Margaret Chin Williams, recently widowed with a $3.2 million settlement. David Park, tech executive with venture capital connections. Jennifer Liu, whose family owned a chain of successful restaurants. Patricia Wong, whose startup had just been acquired by Amazon. They're all wealthy, I said slowly. And mostly Asian American. All recently successful or recently wealthy, all with relatively new money and tech industry connections. Your husband and David Chen have been very strategic about their target demographics. Rebecca's expression darkened. Sarah, I think you stumbled into something bigger than a marriage scam. This looks like a systematic fraud operation. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can't wait to see you at the meeting, beautiful. Wear the blue dress, the one from our anniversary dinner. You look so confident in it, Red Heart. Even his choice of my outfit was manipulation. The blue dress was expensive, designer, exactly the kind of thing that would signal wealth to potential investors. I thought he'd suggested it because he genuinely liked how I looked. Now I realized I was being dressed as bait. I have to ask, Rebecca said, watching me read the message. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once you're in that room, wearing a wire, gathering evidence, there's no going back. Your marriage is over either way, but this could put you in legal jeopardy if something goes wrong. I thought about the 3 years I'd spent believing I was the luckiest woman alive. The friends I'd lost because of Marcus's subtle manipulations. The family relationships he damaged with his careful poisoning. The other women on that list who were about to lose their money because they trusted the wrong man. I'm sure, I said, clipping the wire receiver into my purse. But I want to make one modification to the plan. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. I'm not just going to announce $1 million investment, I said. I'm going to offer to bring in my entire family as investors. My parents, my sister Emma, even my uncle who runs a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Why? I smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare started, it felt genuine. Because I want to see exactly how greedy my husband really is. The next tech offices occupied the entire 15th floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, all glass walls and modern furniture that screamed successful startup. I'd been here twice before for company parties, back when I thought I was supporting my husband's dream instead of funding his con. Marcus met me in the lobby at 1:50 p.m., looking devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, the one I'd bought him for our second anniversary. He kissed my cheek, his hand warm and familiar on my lower back as he guided me toward the elevators. You look incredible, he murmured, and despite everything, my body still responded to that voice. 3 years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Are you nervous? A little, I admitted. The wire felt like it was burning against my skin, though I knew it was invisible beneath the blue dress he'd chosen. It's a lot of money we're talking about. Hey. He stopped walking and turned to face me, hands on my shoulders. Those green eyes were soft with what looked like genuine concern. We don't have to do this if you're having second thoughts. Your comfort matters more than any investment. God, he was good. If I hadn't heard that phone conversation yesterday, I'd be melting right now, grateful to have married such a considerate man. No, I want to do this, I said. Actually, I've been thinking about what you said last night. About showing the other investors how much we believe in Nextech's future. Marcus's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. Oh? What if we went even bigger? Not just my investment, but my whole family's. I watched his face carefully. My Uncle Richard runs Pinnacle Ventures in Palo Alto. And my parents have been looking for new investment opportunities since they sold their medical practice. We could be talking about maybe $10 million total. For a split second, Marcus looked like he'd won the lottery. Pure, undisguised greed flashed across his features before he controlled himself. Sarah, that would be incredible, but I don't want you to feel like you have to involve your family. This is our decision. But think about it, I pressed, hating how easy it was to sound excited about this fictional betrayal. Uncle Richard's endorsement would bring in other VC firms. And if my parents are invested, Emma would probably want in too. You know how competitive she gets. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could practically see him calculating. Emma, who he'd worked so hard to turn me against. My parents, whose wealth he'd been eyeing since our wedding. Uncle Richard, whose venture capital connections could legitimize Nextech enough to attract even bigger victims. You really think they'd be interested? He asked. I think they'd be interested in anything that makes me happy, I said, which was probably true. And seeing their daughter married to the next tech mogul? They'd love that. The elevator opened, and Marcus's hand found mine as we stepped inside. His palm was slightly damp, the first sign of nerves I'd seen from him. There's something I should mention, he said as we rose toward the 15th floor. David suggested we keep the family expansion idea between us for now. Just announce your personal investment today, then approach your relatives privately over the next few weeks. More intimate that way. Of course. Can't have the other potential investors at today's meeting knowing they were competing with a venture capital firm for Nextech's attention. Better to keep everyone thinking they were getting an exclusive opportunity. That makes sense, I agreed. Shall I mention Uncle Richard at all, or keep it completely quiet? Maybe just hint that you have family connections in the industry. Nothing specific. The elevator dinged, and Marcus squeezed my hand. Ready to change our lives, Mrs. Morrison? I squeezed back, smiling up at my husband. I can't wait, darling. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as Marcus introduced me to the other potential investors. They were exactly what Rebecca had predicted, recently wealthy, tech-adjacent, and clearly impressed by the sleek presentation setup David Chen had arranged. Margaret Chen Williams looked nervous, clutching her Hermes purse like a shield. David Park kept checking his phone, probably running calculations. Jennifer Liu smiled warmly when we shook hands, reminding me painfully of myself 3 years ago, trusting, optimistic, about to make the worst financial decision of her life. I was going to save them all. But first, I had to damn myself. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today, David Chen began, clicking his laptop to display the first slide. The Nextech logo gleamed against a backdrop of ascending profit charts that I now knew were complete fabrications. I'm excited to show you why Q4 is going to be our breakout quarter. I settled into my chair next to Marcus, hyper-aware of the wire against my ribs and the weight of my purse containing the receiver. Across the table, Margaret Chen Williams leaned forward eagerly as David launched into his presentation about revolutionary supply chain algorithms and Fortune 500 partnerships that probably didn't exist. Our current client retention rate is 98%, David said smoothly, advancing to a slide showing glowing testimonials. And with the enterprise contracts we're finalizing in November, we're projecting 400% revenue growth by year-end. For clients, Rebecca had said. Nextech had exactly 4 active clients, and they were hemorrhaging money. But David's presentation was masterful, polished graphics, compelling projections, and just enough technical jargon to sound legitimate without being incomprehensible. Marcus's hand found my knee under the table, squeezing gently. When I glanced at him, he was watching me with that soft smile I'd fallen in love with during our first date. The smile that had convinced me I'd found my soulmate. Now, I'd like to invite my business partner Marcus Morrison to discuss our funding goals, David continued. Marcus, would you and Sarah like to share your exciting news? This was it. The moment where I'd either expose myself as a fraud or commit to $1 million lie that would help destroy other people's lives. Marcus stood, his hand moving to my shoulder. Thank you, David. As many of you know, my wife Sarah has been one of Nextech's earliest supporters. Her belief in our vision has been. He paused, looking down at me with what appeared to be genuine emotion. It's been everything. The room was silent except for the subtle hum of the building's ventilation system. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting. Sarah and I have been discussing Nextech's future, and we're thrilled to announce that she'll be increasing her investment to $1 million, coinciding with some family trust fund changes next week. Appreciative murmurs circled the table. Margaret Chin Williams looked impressed. David Park nodded approvingly. Jennifer Liu smiled like she was witnessing something beautiful instead of a financial execution. But that's not all, I said, standing to join Marcus. The words felt like glass in my throat. I've also been talking to my family about Nextech's potential. My uncle Richard runs Pinnacle Ventures in Silicon Valley, and he's very interested in what Marcus and David are building here. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate. David Chen's eyes went wide. Marcus's grip on my shoulder tightened almost imperceptibly. Across the table, David Park suddenly looked much more alert. Pinnacle Ventures? Jennifer Liu asked. They backed CloudSync and Adaptive Technologies, didn't they? Among others, I confirmed, hating myself for using Uncle Richard's reputation to legitimize this fraud. Obviously, any family investment would be separate from what we're discussing today, but Marcus has built something special here. David Chen was practically vibrating with excitement. Sarah, that's incredible news. Would your uncle be interested in a private presentation? I think so. Especially if today's funding round goes well. I let my gaze sweep the room, meeting each potential investor's eyes. Success tends to build on success, doesn't it? What I didn't expect was the flash of something, guilt. Regret, that crossed Marcus's face when he thought no one was looking. For just a moment, staring down at his wife who was about to hand over $1 million and deliver her entire wealthy family to his fraud scheme, my husband looked genuinely conflicted. Then David advanced to the next slide, and the moment passed. Now, let's talk about timeline and investment structure, David said, his voice warm with barely contained greed. I think we're going to make everyone in this room very, very wealthy. The wire burned against my skin as I smiled and nodded, playing my part in their elaborate con while secretly recording every word of their pitch to destroy other people's lives. Only 24 hours until my birthday. 24 hours until Marcus expected to access my inheritance. I couldn't wait to see his face when he realized his trusting wife had been playing a much deeper game than he ever imagined. The meeting ended with handshakes and business cards, everyone energized by David's projections and my fictional family connections. As the other investors filed out, chattering about due diligence and investment timelines, Marcus lingered behind with David, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. I pretended to check my phone while straining to hear their whispered exchange. Pinnacle Ventures could change everything, David was saying. If Richard Chin is Sarah's uncle, we're talking about legitimacy that could bring in 50 million, maybe more. I know, but we need to be careful, Marcus replied, glancing toward me. Sarah's family isn't stupid. If her uncle starts doing real due diligence, then we make sure our books look perfect for the next 2 weeks. I've got contacts at Dataflow and Synergy Systems who owe me favors. They'll backdate some contracts, inflate our client numbers. By the time Pinnacle's people dig deep enough to find problems, we'll have secured enough funding to actually deliver on some promises. My blood chilled. They weren't just running a simple con, they were prepared to manufacture fake business relationships, forge contracts, and potentially drag legitimate companies into their fraud scheme. Mrs. Morrison? Margaret Chin Williams appeared at my elbow, her voice hesitant. I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long have you been investing with Nextech? This would be my first venture into tech startups. Perfect. This was exactly the opening I needed. About 18 months, I said, keeping my voice warm and encouraging. Marcus has been so patient with my questions. You know how overwhelming all the technical aspects can be. Oh yes, absolutely. And you've been happy with the returns so far? I felt the wires weight against my ribs, recording every word. Well, it's been more of a long-term growth play, you know? Marcus always says the real profits come when the company goes public or gets acquired. The quarterly distributions have been modest, but that's normal for a startup in growth phase. Margaret nodded eagerly. That's exactly what David explained to me. And with your family's venture capital connections. She lowered her voice. Between you and me, I'm thinking of investing my entire settlement. Harold always said I was too conservative with money, and after he passed, I promised myself I'd take some real chances. Harold. Her dead husband's life insurance money, everything she had left to rebuild her future. The money Marcus and David were planning to steal with fake contracts and manufactured success stories. Margaret, I said carefully, can I give you some advice? Woman to woman? She leaned closer, eyes bright with interest. Don't invest everything at once. Even with family connections, even with my confidence in Nextech, never put all your eggs in one basket. Start with maybe 20% of what you're considering, see how the first quarter goes. Her face fell slightly. Oh. But David mentioned that the current investment round is limited, and if I want to secure a significant stake. Classic pressure tactic. Create artificial scarcity to force hasty decisions. Trust me, if Nextech is as successful as we all believe, there will be plenty of opportunities down the road. And if something unexpected happens. I shrugged. Well, you'll still have options. Sarah? Marcus appeared beside us, his smile tight. Ready to head home? I thought we could celebrate with dinner at Romano's. Romano's. Where he proposed 2 years ago. Where he'd convinced me to make my first Nextech investment 6 months later. Every significant financial manipulation in our marriage had been preceded by a romantic dinner at Romano's. That sounds perfect, I said, kissing his cheek. The gesture felt like betraying myself, but I needed him relaxed and unsuspicious for what came next. Margaret, think about what I said, okay? In the elevator down, Marcus was practically humming with excitement. That went even better than I hoped. David thinks we could have commitments for $3 million by Friday, and if your Uncle Richard actually comes through. About that, I said, watching his reflection in the polished steel doors. I should probably call him tonight, give him a heads up before you reach out officially. Marcus went very still. You haven't talked to him yet? Well, no. I wanted to see how today went first, make sure I wasn't overselling Nextech's potential. I kept my voice light, casual. But after David's presentation, I'm confident Uncle Richard will be interested. Should I mention any specific aspects of the business model? The elevator reached the lobby, but Marcus didn't move when the doors opened. Other people pushed past us as he stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. My heart hammered against the wire. Of course. Your Uncle Richard. He's your mother's brother, right? The one who started Pinnacle after selling his first company to Microsoft? Every word was a test. Marcus had clearly spent the last hour researching my family connections, probably trying to verify details I'd mentioned in the meeting. The problem was, Uncle Richard didn't exist. I'd made him up completely, borrowing the name and background of a venture capitalist I'd read about in TechCrunch. In my anger and determination to outmaneuver Marcus, I created a fictional family member whose non-existence was about to expose my entire plan. The elevator doors started to close again. Marcus caught them with his hand, still watching my face intently. Yes, I lied, praying my voice sounded steady. Mom's older brother. Why? Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. No reason, sweetheart. Just want to make sure I have all the details right when I put together materials for him. As we walked toward the parking garage, I realized I'd made a catastrophic mistake. In trying to outmanipulate my husband, I'd created a trail of lies that would unravel the moment anyone tried to contact Pinnacle Ventures looking for Richard Chin. I had less than 24 hours to figure out how to explain why my venture capitalist uncle didn't actually exist, or watch my entire plan collapse along with any chance of stopping Marcus and David's fraud. The wire felt heavier with every step, recording evidence of my own deception as much as theirs. Romano's hadn't changed since Marcus proposed here 2 years ago. Same dim lighting, same red leather booths, same pianist playing soft jazz in the corner. But sitting across from my husband now, watching him order the expensive Barolo like we were celebrating something beautiful instead of planning mutual destruction, felt like inhabiting a memory that belonged to someone else. To new beginnings, Marcus said, raising his glass. The wine caught the candlelight, deep red like blood. I clinked my glass against his, forcing a smile. To the future. While Marcus launched into excited chatter about David's projections and timeline for the fake Pinnacle Ventures meeting, I mentally catalogued everything I needed to handle before my fictional uncle's non-existence destroyed my plan. Find a real venture capitalist willing to play along. Create a believable excuse for why Uncle Richard had suddenly become unavailable. Or, the thought made my stomach clench, confess everything to Patricia and hope she could salvage something from the wreckage of my deception. Thinking we could fly up to Palo Alto next weekend, Marcus was saying. I'd love to meet Richard in person before we formalize anything. Actually, I said, seizing on the first excuse I could think of, Uncle Richard is traveling right now. Singapore, I think? Some big tech conference. He might not be back until after the October 20th presentation. Marcus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Singapore? This late in October? You know how these international deals work, I said, desperately hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Different fiscal years, different conference schedules. Besides, he prefers to see companies present to mixed investor groups first. Says it tells him more about management than private meetings. That part was actually true. I'd read it in a TechCrunch interview with a real venture capitalist last month. But Marcus was studying my face with the same intensity he'd shown in the elevator, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Of course, he said slowly. That makes perfect sense. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of lies layered on lies. I invented details about Uncle Richard's investment philosophy, his relationship with my mother, even his favorite restaurants in Palo Alto. Marcus absorbed every word, occasionally asking follow-up questions that made me realize he was building a comprehensive file on my fictional relative. When the check arrived, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression shifted immediately. Everything okay? I asked. David just sent the preliminary investment commitments from today. Margaret Chin Williams wants to put in her full settlement, $3.2 million. Marcus looked up from his phone, eyes bright with something between excitement and guilt. Sarah, I have to ask. What you said to her after the meeting, about not investing everything at once. My blood went cold. What about it? David mentioned she seemed hesitant when she called to confirm her investment amount. Like someone had given her advice about diversification. Marcus reached across the table, covering my hand with his. You were just being friendly, right? Making conversation? The question sounded casual, but his grip on my hand was firm enough to hurt. This was another test, and unlike the Uncle Richard fiction, this one had real consequences. If Marcus suspected I was actively sabotaging his targets. Of course I was being friendly, I said, meeting his eyes directly. But Marcus, she's a widow investing her dead husband's life insurance money. Even if Nextech is everything we believe it to be, wouldn't you feel terrible if she lost everything because we encouraged her to be reckless? Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe even admiration. You're worried about her. I'm worried about us, I corrected, which was completely true. If Margaret loses her life savings and decides to sue, or starts telling people Nextech is a bad investment, that could hurt the company's reputation. Bad publicity spreads faster than good news in tech circles. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than I'd heard it all day. Sometimes I forget how smart you are, he said. How carefully you think through consequences. The comment hit me like a physical blow. For just a second, he sounded like the man I'd fallen in love with. The man who'd told me my analytical mind was one of the things he admired most about me, back when I thought he was admiring me rather than cataloging my vulnerabilities. Smart enough to marry you, I said, the words ash in my mouth. Marcus smiled, and for one horrible moment, it looked genuine. Lucky me. As we drove home through the October darkness, I stared out at the city lights and wondered if any part of our relationship had ever been real. The way he'd looked at me in the restaurant, the pride in his voice when he called me smart, was that the con, or was the con everything else? 23 hours until my birthday. 23 hours until Marcus expected to access my inheritance and I expected to destroy his life. I was no longer sure which one of us was the better liar. The next morning, I woke up to Marcus already gone and a note on his pillow, early meeting with David. Happy almost birthday, beautiful. Tonight we celebrate properly. M. Red Heart. 22 hours. I was brewing coffee when my phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen, and I answered on the first ring. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Rebecca ran a deeper background check on your husband last night. Sarah, Marcus Morrison isn't his real name. The coffee mug slipped from my hands for the second time this week, shattering against the same kitchen tiles. What? His legal name is Marcus Chin. He changed it 6 months before you met him, right around the time he started Next Tech with David. They're cousins, Sarah. This whole thing has been planned for years. I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the broken ceramic. Marcus Chin. The shared surname with half his investor targets wasn't coincidence, it was strategy. Asian American entrepreneurs targeting Asian American wealth, using cultural familiarity to build trust before the betrayal. There's more, Patricia continued. Rebecca found records of 2 previous relationships. Amanda Liu in Portland, whose family owned a chain of medical clinics. Marcus, or whoever he was calling himself then, convinced her to invest $800,000 in a biotech startup that folded 6 months later. And Jennifer Park in Seattle, who lost her entire divorce settlement to a clean energy company that never actually existed. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone. He's done this before. Multiple times. Professional marriage fraud, yes. But Sarah, here's what's really concerning, both women filed police reports. Amanda in 2019, Jennifer in 2021. Both cases were dropped when the women suddenly refused to cooperate with investigators. The kitchen felt like it was spinning. Why would they drop the cases? We don't know. But Rebecca's contact at the FBI says there's been an uptick in romance-based investment fraud targeting recently wealthy Asian Americans on the West Coast. They think it's organized, multiple operators working together, sharing target lists and strategies. I thought about David Chin in yesterday's meeting, how smoothly he'd run the presentation. How quickly he'd pivoted when I mentioned Uncle Richard. How he'd known exactly which pressure tactics to use on Margaret Chin Williams. Patricia, what if Marcus and David aren't just business partners? What if they're running multiple cons simultaneously? That's what we're afraid of. Rebecca's trying to track down Amanda and Jennifer, see if they'll talk off the record. But Sarah, this changes everything. If your husband is part of an organized fraud ring, wearing that wire yesterday might have put you in serious danger. I looked toward Marcus's locked office door. 3 years of marriage, and I'd never once been inside that room when he wasn't present. What was he hiding in there? Financial records from other victims? Communication with other con artists? I need to get into his office, I said. Absolutely not. Sarah, if Marcus is as dangerous as this new information suggests. He's not dangerous to me. Not yet. I'm still valuable. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. He needs me cooperative for 5 more hours until my birthday, then compliant long enough to drain my accounts. If I'm going to find evidence of the other victims, it has to be today. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. If you're determined to do this, you don't go alone. Rebecca can be there in 20 minutes. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by broken ceramic, thinking about Amanda Liu and Jennifer Park. Women who trusted the wrong man and lost everything. Women who'd somehow been frightened into silence rather than pursuing justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, lunch meeting ran long. Home by 6 p.m. Have a surprise for early birthday celebration party popper. A surprise. On any other day, those words would have filled me with excitement. Now they felt like a threat. I swept up the broken mug and headed upstairs to change clothes. Rebecca Santos would be here soon, and we had 5 hours to uncover whatever Marcus was hiding in his locked office before he came home with his birthday surprise. 21 hours until I turned 35. 21 hours until Marcus expected to access my inheritance. But first, I was going to find out exactly how many other lives he destroyed practicing for mine. Rebecca arrived with a toolkit that would have impressed a professional burglar. Lockpicks, electronic jammers, even a tiny camera designed to slip under doors. But Marcus's office lock turned out to be disappointingly standard. Rebecca had it open in under 30 seconds. Amateurs, she muttered, pushing the door open. If you're running a multi-million-dollar fraud, at least invest in decent security. The office looked exactly as I'd expected, sleek desk, dual monitors, filing cabinets that probably contained the paperwork I'd signed over the past 3 years. What I hadn't expected was the wall-mounted whiteboard covered in what looked like a relationship flowchart. Jesus Christ, Rebecca breathed, pulling out her camera. Sarah, look at this. The board was divided into columns labeled with women's names. Amanda Liu, Portland, medical family $800,000, complete. Jennifer Park, Seattle, divorce settlement $650,000, complete. Sarah Chin Morrison, SF Bay, trust fund $2.3 million, in progress. But those weren't the only names. There were 6 more columns in various stages of completion. Michelle Wong in Los Angeles, currently engaged to someone named David Kim. Lisa Chen in San Diego, whose column showed real estate family $4.1 million, courtship phase. They're running a goddamn assembly line, I whispered, staring at my own name written in Marcus's careful handwriting. Under my column, he noted, isolated from family, previous investments committed, trust access October 15th, Uncle Richard, verify. That last note made my stomach drop. Marcus was already suspicious about my fictional uncle. Rebecca was photographing everything, but I was drawn to the filing cabinet labeled current operations. Inside, I found folders for each woman on the board. Amanda's file was thick with bank statements, investment agreements, and printed emails. At the very back was a police report and a handwritten note, a withdrew complaint after Dee's visit. Payment processed. Rebecca, they didn't just steal from these women. They paid them to stay quiet. She looked up from photographing the whiteboard. Probably a fraction of what they lost, but enough to avoid prosecution. Classic settlement strategy. I pulled out Jennifer Park's file. Same pattern, massive investment losses followed by a mysterious complaint withdrawal. But Jennifer's file contained something Amanda's didn't, printed screenshots of text messages between Marcus and someone named Kay. Target secured, trust established. J ready for phase 3 extraction. Good. Remember timeline, other operations need funding by December. Kay had responded, M in Portland is asking questions again. I getting nervous. Handle it. Can't have exposure before SF job completes. Rebecca, I said, my voice barely steady. This isn't just organized fraud. They're coordinating multiple operations simultaneously. And they're willing to intimidate previous victims to protect current cons. My phone rang, making both of us jump. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. Answer it, Rebecca whispered. Act normal. Hey, sweetheart, Marcus's voice was warm, loving. I know I said 6 o'clock, but I might be a few minutes late. David wants to review the investor commitments one more time before your birthday tomorrow. That's fine, I managed. I'm just reading at home. Perfect. Oh, and Sarah? That surprise I mentioned? I think you're really going to love it. It's something I've been planning for a very long time. After he hung up, I stared at my phone with growing dread. On any other day, Marcus's excitement about a surprise would have been endearing. Now, surrounded by evidence of his systematic destruction of other women's lives, his words felt ominous. We need to finish this and get out, Rebecca said, still photographing files. But Sarah, there's something else you need to see. She handed me a folder labeled SF Extended Network. Inside were detailed financial profiles of my parents, my sister Emma, even my actual relatives who worked in tech. Including a real venture capitalist named Richard Chen who worked at Pinnacle Ventures. Marcus knew Uncle Richard was real. He'd known all along. Which meant my husband wasn't just suspicious about my lies. He was 3 steps ahead of me. The folder slipped from my hands, financial profiles scattering across Marcus's desk. My parents' investment portfolio. Emma's savings account from her medical practice sale. Even my cousin David's startup equity breakdown, all of it meticulously researched and annotated in Marcus's handwriting. But it was the sticky note attached to the real Richard Chen's Pinnacle Ventures profile that made my blood turn to ice. Sarah mentioned RC October 14th. She doesn't know we've been courting him for 3 months. Perfect convergence. Rebecca, I whispered, pointing at the note with a shaking finger. They've been targeting my actual uncle this entire time. She grabbed the file, scanning the contents. Look at this timeline. They approached Richard Chen in July with a preliminary next tech pitch. He expressed cautious interest in September. They've been playing a long game on your family while running the marriage con on you. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Sarah, this is Richard Chen from Pinnacle Ventures. Marcus Morrison reached out about a family connection? Would love to discuss. Available for call tonight if convenient. The timing was too perfect. Marcus wasn't late because of investor meetings. He was orchestrating the convergence of his 2 separate cons in real time. My fictional uncle was about to become devastatingly real, and Marcus was positioning himself as the bridge between his trusting wife and her venture capitalist relative. We have to go, Rebecca said, shoving files back into the cabinet. If your husband is coordinating this level of manipulation, he's going to want to control every aspect of the Richard Chen introduction. He could be on his way home right now. But I was staring at another document that had fallen from the folder, a printed email chain between Marcus and David Chen dated just this morning. Phase 4 acceleration approved. S's early birthday gift should secure emotional compliance through trust fund transfer. If RC meeting goes well tomorrow, we move timeline up to October 16th instead of October 20th. Rebecca, what's phase 4? She looked over my shoulder at the email. I don't know, but it happens tonight. Your early birthday celebration isn't just dinner, it's another manipulation designed to keep you compliant for something happening tomorrow. My hands were shaking as I photographed the email with my phone. Whatever Marcus had planned for tonight, it was significant enough to potentially move up their entire investor presentation timeline. Something that would ensure my emotional compliance during the trust fund transfer. The sound of a car door slamming in our driveway made us both freeze. Shit, Rebecca breathed, glancing at her watch. It's only 5:15. He's early. I could hear Marcus's key in the front door, then his voice calling out, Sarah? Honey, I'm home. I brought champagne. Rebecca was already closing the filing cabinet, but there were still papers scattered on the desk. I grabbed the Richard Chen profile and shoved it into my purse while she used her phone to photograph the whiteboard one more time. Sarah? Marcus's footsteps were on the stairs now. Where are you, beautiful? Bathroom. I called out, my voice cracking slightly. Be down in a second. Rebecca slipped out of the office and down the hallway toward the guest room while I frantically straightened Marcus's desk. By the time his footsteps reached the top of the stairs, I was emerging from our bedroom, trying to look like I'd been changing clothes instead of uncovering his elaborate fraud network. There's my birthday girl, Marcus said, sweeping me into his arms. The kiss felt like betrayal, his lips warm and familiar while my purse held evidence of his systematic destruction of other women's lives. You're early, I managed. Couldn't wait to start celebrating. His eyes were bright with excitement as he held up a bottle of Dom Perignon. Besides, I have news that couldn't wait until tomorrow. I followed him downstairs, hyper-aware of Richard Chen's financial profile burning like a coal in my purse. Whatever Marcus was about to tell me, whatever phase 4 entailed, I was walking into it blind while he held every advantage. 18 hours until my birthday. 18 hours until Marcus expected to access my inheritance. But first, I had to survive whatever surprise he'd been planning for a very long time. Marcus popped the champagne in our living room, the cork hitting the ceiling with a sound like a gunshot. I flinched, my nerves already frayed from the office discovery, and he noticed immediately. Hey, you okay? He set down the bottle and moved toward me, concern creasing his features. You seem jumpy. Just tired, I said, forcing a smile. Long day thinking about tomorrow, about the investment, everything changing. He pulled me close, and I could smell his cologne, the same Tom Ford I bought him last Christmas. Everything about him was exactly the same as it had been a week ago, before I knew the truth. Same hands that had held me through my grandmother's funeral. Same voice that had whispered I love you every morning for 3 years. About that, Marcus said, leading me to the couch. The news I mentioned? Your Uncle Richard called me this afternoon. My blood turned to ice, but I kept my expression neutral. Oh? Apparently you mentioned next tech to him? He's very interested in learning more. Marcus handed me a champagne flute, his eyes searching my face. Sarah, why didn't you tell me you'd already reached out to him? This was the trap. Marcus knew I hadn't contacted Richard Chen, because Marcus and David had been courting him for months. He was testing whether I'd admit to the lie or double down on the deception. I didn't want to get your hopes up, I said carefully. You know how Uncle Richard is about mixing family and business. I just mentioned it casually when Mom and I talked to him last weekend. Marcus nodded slowly, but something flickered in his expression. Of course. Well, he's flying down from Palo Alto tomorrow evening. Wants to meet with us right after your trust fund becomes accessible. He raised his glass. Perfect timing. Tomorrow? My voice came out higher than intended. But I thought we were keeping the family involvement quiet until after the October 20th presentation? Change of plans. Richard was very insistent about moving quickly. Said he had other deals closing soon and wanted to prioritize family opportunities. Marcus sipped his champagne, watching me over the rim. You don't seem excited. I was trapped between lies. If I acted too enthusiastic, he might suspect I was manipulating him. Too hesitant, and he'd know something was wrong. Meanwhile, the real Richard Chen was expecting a call about a family connection that didn't exist, and I had no way to warn him about Marcus's true intentions. I'm excited, I said. Just nervous about mixing family money with our money, you know? If something went wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. Marcus set down his glass and took my hands in his. Sarah, I need you to trust me completely tomorrow. With Richard, with a trust fund transfer, with everything. Can you do that? The question hung in the air between us. His green eyes were intense, almost hypnotic, and I could see why I'd fallen for him 3 years ago. Even knowing what I knew, part of me wanted to say yes, to sink back into the fantasy where Marcus loved me and we were building a future together. Of course I trust you, I whispered, the lie burning my throat. Marcus smiled and kissed my forehead. Good. Because tomorrow night, after we meet with Richard, I have something very special planned. Something that's going to change everything between us. My phone buzzed with a text. I glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. Sarah, Richard Chen again. Marcus mentioned surprise family celebration tomorrow? Looking forward to meeting you. Should I bring anything special? Marcus was reading over my shoulder. Tell him just to bring his appetite for success, he said with a laugh that sounded forced. Tomorrow's going to be quite a celebration. 17 hours until my birthday. 17 hours until Richard Chen walked unknowingly into Marcus's trap, dragging my entire family's reputation down with him. I was running out of time to save anyone, including myself. The champagne tasted like acid as I forced myself to smile and toast our bright future. Marcus was describing his plans for tomorrow, lunch at the Peninsula Hotel with Richard, followed by the trust fund transfer at the bank, then a special dinner to celebrate our new family business partnership. Each detail felt like another nail in my coffin. I've already arranged everything with First National, Marcus said, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. The trust officer will have the transfer paperwork ready at 2 p.m., right after your birthday becomes official. Simple electronic transfer to our joint investment account. Our joint investment account. The one I'd never used, never even seen statements for. The one Marcus had insisted we open for tax purposes when we got married. How much are we talking about transferring initially? I asked, as if I didn't know he wanted every penny. Well, since Richard will want to see we're serious, I was thinking the full accessible amount. Show him we're not just playing around. Marcus's voice was casual, but his grip on my wrist had tightened. That would be $2.3 million, plus the quarterly disbursement that comes available tomorrow. So roughly $2.8 million total. Nearly $3 million. My grandmother's entire legacy, gone in a single afternoon to fund Marcus's elaborate con. I thought about Amanda Liu and Jennifer Park, wondered if they'd sat in rooms like this, being convinced to destroy their own futures while thinking they were building them. My phone rang, Patricia's name flashing on the screen. Marcus glanced at it, his expression sharpening. Your lawyer? Kind of late for legal business, isn't it? Probably just confirming tomorrow's appointment, I said, declining the call. You know how thorough Patricia is with trust fund procedures. But Marcus was already standing, moving toward the window with his champagne. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want complete honesty. My heart hammered against my ribs. Of course. Have you discussed our investment plans with Patricia? Or with anyone else in your family besides Richard? The question was a minefield. If I said yes, he'd know I was suspicious enough to seek outside advice. If I said no and he'd somehow found out otherwise, I'd be caught in another lie. Just general questions about the trust fund mechanics, I said carefully. Patricia needed to understand the timeline for tax implications. Marcus turned from the window, his green eyes studying my face with uncomfortable intensity. And Emma? Your parents? Have they expressed any opinions about next tech? Why would they? This is our decision. Of course it is. But something in his tone had shifted, become more calculated. It's just that David mentioned he'd gotten some unusual inquiries today. Someone asking questions about our company registration, our client list. Corporate background check type questions. My blood froze. Rebecca's SEC contact. Her research into next tech is financials. Had we left a trail that Marcus and David could trace back to me? That's probably just standard due diligence from potential investors, I said, praying my voice sounded steady. Isn't that what you'd want? People taking next tech seriously enough to do thorough research? Marcus nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. You're right. I'm probably being paranoid. He moved back to the couch, but instead of sitting beside me, he settled into the chair across from me. Creating distance. It's just that tomorrow is so important, Sarah. For us, for our future, for everything we've built together. I need to know I can count on you completely. You can. The lie was getting easier each time I told it. Good. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like a long text conversation. Because David just confirmed that Margaret Chin Williams transferred her full $3.2 million this afternoon. Jennifer Liu committed another $900,000. With your family investment and the trust fund money, we'll have enough to make Next Tech everything we've dreamed of. $7 million. $7 million stolen from trusting women who thought they were investing in legitimate business opportunities instead of funding their own destruction. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Rebecca, emergency. Marcus's cousin David just booked a flight to Portland. Amanda Liu called police again 2 hours ago. They're cleaning up loose ends. Get out now. I stared at the message, my champagne glass slipping in my suddenly sweaty palm. David was flying to Portland to handle Amanda Liu, the previous victim who was asking questions again. Which meant they knew their operation was compromised. Which meant I was in immediate danger. Marcus was watching me read the text, his expression unreadable. Everything okay? Just Rebecca confirming our lunch plans for next week, I lied, deleting the message. Girl talk about marriage and investments. Rebecca? Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. I don't think you've mentioned a Rebecca before. 16 hours until my birthday. But I was beginning to suspect I might not live to see it. The name hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Marcus's eyes had gone completely still, not angry, not suspicious, just empty. It was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on his face. Rebecca Santos, I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. From my yoga class. I think I mentioned her a few weeks ago? Marcus set down his champagne glass with deliberate precision. I have an excellent memory for names, Sarah. Especially names of people my wife spends time with. My phone was burning in my palm with Rebecca's warning, but I couldn't risk looking at it again. David was on his way to Portland to silence Amanda Liu. How long before they decided I knew too much to be useful anymore? You're probably right, I said with a nervous laugh. I meet so many people these days, sometimes I forget who I've mentioned to you. The investment meetings, all the new social circles. Marcus stood up abruptly, moving to his briefcase by the front door. Speaking of investments, I have something for your early birthday celebration. That surprise I mentioned. He returned with a small velvet box, the kind that usually held jewelry. My heart lurched stupidly, some buried part of me still hoping this was all a misunderstanding, that Marcus was about to give me diamond earrings and confess his love. Instead, he handed me a thick legal document. Power of attorney papers, he said, settling back into his chair with predatory stillness. I thought it would be romantic, legally binding ourselves together even more completely before tomorrow's big day. I stared at the document, my vision blurring slightly. The language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out: full financial authority, investment decisions, trust fund management. If I signed this, Marcus wouldn't need me conscious for tomorrow's bank transfer. He wouldn't need me conscious at all. This is... I struggled to find words that wouldn't betray my terror. This is very thorough. David's lawyer drew it up. He said it would streamline everything with Richard tomorrow, show him we're a unified team, that our investments come from a place of complete trust. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Of course, it's entirely your choice, sweetheart. I'd never pressure you. But his tone suggested the exact opposite. This wasn't a request, it was a test. Sign the papers and prove my continued usefulness, or refuse and confirm his suspicions about my loyalty. My phone buzzed again. Without thinking, I glanced down at the notification preview. Rebecca, Amanda found dead this morning. Apparent suicide. Get out now. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. Amanda Liu, the medical clinic heiress who'd lost $800,000 to Marcus's previous con, who'd been asking questions again, dead just hours before David's flight to Portland. When I looked up, Marcus was staring directly at my phone screen. Bad news, he asked quietly. I fumbled for an explanation, any explanation that didn't involve dead women and fraud investigations. My friend's grandmother passed away. Very sudden. Marcus nodded slowly, but his eyes never left my face. I'm sorry to hear that. Sudden deaths can be very unsettling. Make people question things they previously took for granted. The threat was unmistakable. Amanda's suicide was a message meant for me as much as a solution to their Portland problem. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice soft and reasonable, why don't you sign the power of attorney papers now? Then we can put all the business talk aside and just enjoy our evening together. He held out an expensive pen, a Mont Blanc I'd given him for his birthday last year, back when I thought we were celebrating milestones instead of marking time until my destruction. 15 hours until my birthday. But as I stared at the legal document that would give Marcus complete control over my finances, I realized he wasn't planning to wait that long. The power of attorney wasn't about streamlining tomorrow's bank transfer. It was about making sure tomorrow's bank transfer happened whether I was alive to authorize it or not. I stared at the Mont Blanc pen in Marcus's outstretched hand, my grandmother's voice echoing in my memory. Sarah, never sign anything when you're scared. Fear makes us stupid. You know what? I said, setting down my champagne glass. I think I'd like Patricia to review this first. She gets so cranky when I sign financial documents without her input. Marcus's smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind his eyes. Of course. Though she might ask why we need power of attorney papers when you'll be right there tomorrow for the transfer. She might, I agreed, pulling out my phone. Let me call her now, actually. Get her blessing so we can celebrate properly. I dialed Patricia's number, my heart hammering as it rang. Marcus was watching me with that terrifying stillness, probably calculating whether I'd become more liability than asset. Sarah? Patricia answered immediately. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Hi Patricia, I said, keeping my voice bright. Marcus surprised me with some power of attorney papers for tomorrow's celebration. Could you take a quick look? There was a pause. Patricia knew my voice well enough to hear the strain underneath the cheerfulness. Of course, dear. Why don't you photograph the documents and send them to me right now? I'll review them immediately. I snapped photos of each page, Marcus tracking my every movement. As I hit send, Patricia said loudly enough for him to hear, I'll call you back in 10 minutes with my thoughts. Perfect, I said, hanging up. She's reviewing them now. Marcus nodded, but he'd moved closer to me on the couch. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough that he could grab me if I tried to run. Sarah, he said softly, I need you to be completely honest with me about something. My phone rang. Patricia's name on the screen. That was fast, Marcus observed. I answered, putting it on speaker. Hi, Patricia. What's the verdict? Sarah. Patricia's voice was crisp, professional. These documents are extremely comprehensive. In fact, they're identical to power of attorney papers I've seen in several recent fraud cases. I'd recommend not signing anything until we can meet in person. Marcus went completely still. Also, Patricia continued, I took the liberty of calling Richard Chen at Pinnacle Ventures. Interesting conversation. He's been expecting your husband's call for months, but he's never heard of you, dear. Quite curious about how Marcus knew to mention a family connection. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Marcus was staring at the phone with an expression I'd never seen before, calculation mixed with something that might have been panic. Finally, Patricia said, the FBI would very much like to speak with you both. Particularly about Amanda Liu, who died this morning under suspicious circumstances in Portland. They have some questions about David Chen's travel arrangements. Marcus lunged for the phone, but I was already moving, racing toward the front door. Behind me, I heard him swearing, then the sound of his footsteps pounding after me. I yanked open the front door to find Rebecca Santos on the doorstep, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Mrs. Morrison, the taller agent said, flashing his badge, I'm Agent Williams. We have a warrant to search these premises and arrest Marcus Chen for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Marcus appeared behind me, his face a mask of cold fury. But when he saw the badges, something crumbled in his expression. Sarah, he said quietly, you have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, I replied, stepping aside to let the agents pass. I stopped you from destroying any more lives. As they cuffed Marcus, he looked at me one final time. I did love you, you know. At least part of me did. No, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You loved my trust fund. You never even knew me well enough to love me. The agents led him away, and I stood in my doorway watching my husband, my fraud of a husband, disappear into the October night. In a few hours, I'd turn 35. My inheritance would become accessible, just as Marcus had planned. But instead of funding his elaborate con, that money would help me rebuild the life he'd systematically destroyed. Starting with calling Emma, my parents, and every friend I'd lost along the way to tell them the truth about the man I'd married. When did I realize my spouse married me for the wrong reasons? The moment I discovered I was worth more to him as a mark than as a wife. But realizing it saved my life, and the lives of every woman whose name would never make it onto Marcus's whiteboard of victims.